All right, let's go ahead and begin. David, we got it? No? If you'll hit auto, there you go. There you go, that's it. Yes? Yeah? The one, okay, all right, good. All right, good to see you guys tonight. Glad you're out and about. We've got people, a number who are recovering from COVID, and so we got a smaller crowd tonight than usual, but usually on Sunday it worked out where we had a lot more online Sunday, so it was good to have both. April Candela is going to need help moving this Saturday, not her, but her parents, and 10 o'clock Saturday. In the MHCOC recap, I had the address. It's in Wentzville where her parents live now, and you can click that link and it'll go to Google Maps so you can find out how to get there. And then she lives over in St. Anne, Overland? Yeah. But there's a link also to get to her place as well. So she's going to rent a truck. If you will let her know, but let her know ahead of time. Just don't show up. Let her know so she'll kind of, know how much. Then that would be great. So Dennis Enoch shared this morning that some friends of theirs who used to go to Lafayette Church, Gary and Carol Gage, and he just saw this on a Facebook post, so he hasn't talked to them. Their son Caleb was canoeing on the Missouri River, and he went under and has not been seen since then. A body has been found but not identified as of my last phone call, but it's hard to imagine that it not being him. So he was 20-something years old. So that family, I believe they live in Texas now, if I'm not mistaken, but you can't imagine that kind of loss. So be praying for that family. Nancy is recovering and doing pretty well. So keep her in your prayers as she recovers. No, it was a number I don't recognize. So keep her in your prayers. So we took Anna to the ER the other day just for precautionary lung x-ray stuff. All the COVID meds that is available now to help people with COVID. Anna weighs too little to take those, so she couldn't take any of them. But her lungs were clear. She's done several days of high temps, but yesterday was much better, today was better, so I think she's on the mend. Took Flo this morning to the ER by ambulance. So she was having just a host of issues, some COVID related, some not. But CAT scans and x-rays looked okay. She's home now, but she's still dealing with some nausea. So keep her in your prayers too. And in the midst of all of that, keep Brenda in your prayers, who's having to deal with a whole family who's down and sick, and she's about to lose it. So if I come knocking on your door, that means I need a place to stay. So anything else we need to announce tonight? Things that are going on? Yes.
I have a prayer request. My coworker's brother and his friend were the ones involved in the canoe that tipped over.
Oh, okay.
Missouri River. Her brother's the one who survived.
Okay.
They were really close friends. He was a father of a 4-year-old, the one who passed away.
Okay.
So just prayers for all of those.
Were you coming in? Did you hear me mention that earlier? So Dennis Enoch knows his parents from Lafayette. I don't think they're there now, but they were at Lafayette at one time. And so their son's name is Caleb. He was the one that did not survive. And so interesting that we have these connections here. So yeah. But your coworker was with them?
My coworker was not.
Okay. Her brother, okay, but he did survive. Well, that's still frightening for all of them, and tragic. Okay, we'll keep them all in our prayers. Anything else? All right, let's pray together. Our Father, we come to you as the only true God, the powerful one, who, although you've created us and the universe and keeps this whole world spinning. Your greatest desire is for us to talk to you, to share with you our heart, to ask you to pour your blessings on us, to give your comfort to us. And we trust and know that you hear our prayers and that you are even now working to bring healing to people who are sick, comfort to those who are suffering great loss, relieving stress for those who are overcome with all that life is bringing to them. Help us to be your hands and your voice as well in their lives, but we trust you to work in ways that we cannot and to reach people at greater distances than we can. And so we lay all these requests at your feet. And we ask this through your Son. Amen. All right, a study of the law of Moses is interesting because there's a lot of laws in there that you just want to say, hey, I got to bring my nephew, my father, my friend to hear that one because they need to hear that law, But in the middle of the law of Moses are always some laws where we go, oh, I don't know that I like that one. Now, understand that the law of Moses applied to the Jews of that era, and that we live under a new law. And as you read through the law of Moses, we're more and more thankful for that, about how God's interest is more focused on the nature of our heart rather than the perfection of our actions. And while that is frightening as well, because we can drum up some pretty quick actions, it's comforting to know that when you read through the minutia of what they had to accomplish, it can be overwhelming sometimes. But even some laws from the Old Testament have hints in the New Testament, and we're still troubled by them. So I wanted to spend the night on probably one of the most troubling categories of laws in the Old Testament. And I want your take on it and see if we can make heads or tails out of this, all right? So I'm going to pass out a few laws for you to read, okay? So Steve Jones, would you read this one here for me from Exodus 21, verse 4, all right? Kathy, would you read 21, verse 7? Tim, do you want to read one? 21, verse 20 and 21. That's the worst one. 21, chapter 21, verses 20 and 21. Donna, you want to read one for me? You can read through the whole section, but I just really want, because it's a lot of minutia. Why don't you just read for us verse 31 and 32? I can set it up, or you can set it up, but the whole section is 28 through 32. Chapter 21, yes, ma'am. Okay. The larger sections deal with how that law is applied in a lot of ways, but I want to read that particular verse. All right, we're going to start with Steve, I think.
We're going to go back up a few verses just to give some context.
Okay.
Verse 2, when you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he comes in single, he shall go out single. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. Verse 4, if his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out alone.
Okay, did you understand what he was saying there? If you are a slave and a release time is coming, if you became a slave and were married, then you and your spouse get to be free together. But if you became a slave and then your master gave you a wife while you were a slave and you and your wife had children, then when your release date came, you got to go, but the wife and the child did not get to go free. All right? You loving the law now? All right, 21 verse 7. All right. The NIV says, uses a different word there, and that is, she shall not go free. Steve was talking about going free, and it says here that if you were to sell your daughter into slavery, then she does not get to go free. Now, we'll parse that later on, but that's kind of the layman's reading of it. Okay, that's your co-worker's reading of it. Okay, you loving this yet? How about 21, 20, and 21?
Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property.
Since the slave is what?
Their property.
Okay. Do you want to set this up, Donna?
Yeah, the comment is that in between his and mine is the eye for the eye, tooth for a tooth.
Mm-hmm. But what is the larger thing? The larger case law right now is if somebody's ox gored somebody, who's responsible? What kind of recompense has to be done? Okay. And you going to read the whole thing or just? Okay, that's fine.
When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall not be liable. But if the ox has been accustomed to goring in the past, and its owner has been warned, but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is imposed on him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is imposed on him. If it gores a man's son or daughter, he shall be dealt with according to the same rule.
Okay, let's pause for a moment. So, are we happy right now with this law? If you didn't know the risk and your ox gore somebody, then there's price to be paid. But if you knew the risk and you did not keep your oxen caged, then this is considered libel on a much greater level. Okay, you say, okay, I can buy that. Now, here's the verse that we're going to love.
If the ox gores a slave, male or female, the owner shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned.
All right. A little disparity there in recompense, right? So, these aren't the only verses in Scripture that deal with slavery. Have any of you ever had any friends, Christian or non-Christian friends, ask you about the Bible's take on slavery and were troubled by that? Anybody have those comments? David, you have? Can you...
Basically, how can you be okay with a Bible that becomes slavery?
Okay.
It's usually kind of the gist.
All right. Anybody else? You're hanging around way too many Christian people.
We had a hot discussion about it years ago. I think it was before these guys were involved. When we were studying the Civil War and reading General Lee's view, using scripture to support slavery,
Mm-hmm.
and Grant's view, also as a Christian, using scripture to oppose slavery. And it was interesting how two very sincere
Well, you can, I mean, we're not at a point now for making assessment, but I mean, you know, if you study history long enough, you know that people from North and South, well, let's pick on South for a minute here. People from the South were making their case for the appropriateness of slavery based, at least for their, I mean, they were, what they wanted is they wanted free labor. I get that. But what they were making their case on was that Scripture they would say approves it, okay? And you read these verses from the Old Testament and you say, man, that's a possibility there. Should I get this? No? Hello? Yes? I'm doing well, Hank. You're right now talking in class on Wednesday night.
Oh, okay, my fault. Sorry about that. I'll catch up with you later.
That's okay. I'm putting your mic here so you can say something to the class. All right, talk to you later. Come to class. You won't have to call me. You say, well, that's the Old Testament. Yeah, we got those pesky passages, don't we? What does Paul say about it? A couple of places. He gives orders to masters, how they should treat their slaves. He gives orders to slaves, right? How they should act in respect of their masters. And you would think, I mean, I'm comfortable, if you can use that term, holding the very ancient world to a different standard. But when you get to New Testament era, that's modern enough that you go, surely somebody should be speaking up differently about this, you know? But Paul, nowhere does he say, you know, slavery is wrong and you shouldn't be involved in it. Now he does, kind of, you know where that kind of is? Yes, he does. He does tell their, that wasn't what I was thinking about, but he does tell the slaves if they can win their freedom, that's a good thing. I was thinking about Philemon, the book of Philemon, where he's talking to Philemon, who had a servant who had run away and had met Paul and had become a convert, I think after he ran away, became a convert. And then Paul says, oh yeah, I know Philemon. And he goes, you better go make that right with him. And so he sends Onesimus, the slave, back to Philemon with a letter from Paul that was kind as can be, but strong-arming him with every power he had. And he's basically saying, see this guy differently now. He is a brother, not a slave, and you'd be doing me a favor if you send him back to me, you know. Which we don't have an answer to that, but I have no doubt that Onesimus went back, you know, fully with the full blessing of Philemon. So we have those hints, and yet we have Paul saying, "Hey, slaves, you need to behave when you're a slave." And you know, the Southern slavery of Civil War time would use those verses too. Yes, sir.
So it seems like when I read the scriptures of the New Testament, not that Christianity is how we live, is above any kind of situation in the world we find ourselves in. Not necessarily that slavery is correct, but if you find yourself in a position, you should be acting as a Christian.
Yes. So you're saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, that Paul's writings were not intended to be a polemic against slavery, or for it, but an instruction about how to live in the system that exists. Correct? All right. I will buy that, and I think there's a landing place there. Let me be the devil's advocate here, okay? If you're Paul and you have a pulpit, and people are reading you far and wide, why not use it? Okay? Because the message that has been uniformly accepted by the Christian movement of this era is that slavery is not, that all humans are equal and have equal rights and should be treated on some level of equality, and that slavery is an affront to that. Slavery is an affront to the fact that we're all made in the image of God, okay? And I can circle around that. And so some people would ask, why wouldn't Paul say that? Okay? Hold on. Steve has one.
Well, would you have realized Paul didn't live in the 21st century. Paul lived in the first century. In the first century, slavery existed. It was part of society.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Paul fully understood that God's gift through Christ was freely available to everyone. Onesimus, he brought to the salvational faith. Okay? He was a slave, an escaped slave. So he recognized that due to the circumstances of society of that day, this is what needed to be done. Okay? That was not his ox to gore, shall I say, but to push on the concept of slavery that was so fully embedded in society of the day that it was accepted.
So I think Steve has a good point that we, as much as we would like to, and as reasonable as it sounds, it's a bit naive of us to hold ancient people accountable to modern ethics. Okay, even as I say that, that sounds wrong. Okay, because on one level you could say, hey, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. If slavery's wrong now, it was wrong then. I mean, God had no problem making pronouncements to the ancient world on a host of other things that went against societal norms. And, and he just, there it is. So let me be the devil's advocate for a moment here, Steve. And you make a good point. I really do agree with you. But my devil's advocate is saying this. The same thing could have been said about the 1800s when slavery was broadly accepted, but a few voices spoke up before their time, before it was popular. But somebody's got to speak up first. Somebody's got to speak up when it's unpopular before it becomes more popular.
Man with an idea could start a revolution.
Yeah.
I mean, women's suffrage.
Yeah. So you wonder. Again, I'm really kind of playing the devil's advocate here, okay? But you wonder, why couldn't Paul be that guy? All right, Donna, then David back here.
So, going back to the one about the daughter,
Uh-huh.
if my daughter in ancient times, I am too poor to support my daughter, which is the reason you sell your child into slavery, which would have been a horrific thought to any parent. But if you have no food and you can barely feed yourself, your only alternative is for your daughter to be a prostitute or get sold to the nice guy down the road who has a farm. Now, I'd take that in a heartbeat, and I think my daughter would too. She'd much rather work as a slave and get fed and clothed and cared for, hopefully kindly,
All right.
for a certain amount of time. Maybe she could win her freedom, maybe not. It sounds like the girls didn't have much of a choice.
I will agree with that. No, so Donna's saying that, as unpleasant as sold into slavery is, starvation and whatever else that may be at your doorstep is worse, and you would consider that. And I will agree with that. I'm also going to kind of blend that together with what Steve was saying, is that we see all slavery easily through Civil War eyes. But there is an ancient slavery, as as much as I'm not here to defend slavery, there's an ancient slavery that was seen through totally different eyes. And one of those has to do with economics, okay? So there's an economic situation where people would choose slavery, all right? They would choose that. In fact, not all slaves made the choice, but all Hebrew slaves made the choice for slavery. Okay, they signed on the dotted line. So we'll explore that in greater detail in just a few moments. David?
So, overarching question, why did you really address it? Because this world is not my home, I'm just passing through. It is, the main gospel message isn't about this world. Thankfully, the truths of the gospel message leads us to a more moral world, a more just world, and all that. But this was right out the gate. The priority is the gospel. And beyond what can happen, in that first century, he knows that gospel message ultimately wins out.
Yeah, so I could agree with that. Let me give you a modern day example here. I have political opinions. In the previous election, I cast a vote. I never talk about my political opinions. And I never talk about who I voted for. Because, especially in this climate, when I choose to do that, that becomes my message and not Jesus Christ. However, devil's advocate, there has to come a time when, like Bonhoeffer out of Germany, who stands up and he says, this is wrong and Hitler should be opposed and this is not God's will. At a certain point, the evilness of government or politicians rise to such a level that you have to say, this is becoming my message because they are dabbling into my area now, not just their areas. Now it's not just a matter of who's getting taxed more. Now it's a matter of whether we're going to imprison people falsely or whether we're going to persecute Jews or whether we're going to cause them inhuman or whatever else, And I got to tell you, even in the U.S., in this modern climate, there are times that I still grapple with, should I lend a voice to this issue? Or should I focus on my primary issue? And I got to tell you, as a preacher, I only know whether that's right or wrong in hindsight. And I look back sometimes and I go, man, I was quiet way too long, Churches of Christ, wholesale, did not address slavery. We were not going to go there. Well, we're mainly a Southern church, except for Maryland Heights. We're mainly a Southern church, okay? So, there were Christian people in churches across the country rallying for freedom of slaves, not in Churches of Christ. Probably not in, I don't know about Christian churches or not. We were more Southern than you guys were. So, but I'm not saying there wasn't a voice, but it didn't get printed, okay? And whether that's a matter of I know where my bread is buttered, or whether that's a matter of I don't know that I want to step into that territory, or whether it's a matter of I really saw the world through those lenses, whatever, now you look back and you go, we should have said something,
There again, we're applying today's social environment to 200 years ago.
Well, yes, okay. I would even say that probably 10 years after that, you look back and says, yeah, we should have said something, But you are right. Applying modern understanding. Let me not say modern ethics. Modern understanding of ethics to ancient people is a fruitless endeavor.
Well, if we roll it back into the framework of Exodus 21, it's obviously this is more than indentured servitude.
Okay, all right, we're going to get there. Hold on. You are right about that. So let me give you a couple of statements that I hear. Christopher Hitchens, who is kind of a sharp-tongued atheist, okay? He writes this, and others say similar things, but he says it point blank. The Bible may, indeed does, contain a warrant for trafficking in humans. Okay? Well, you read that and you go, I mean, if you're a non-Christian and you're reading that, what are you thinking? I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to be part of this movement here. Here's another one that I read. If your holy book gave laws about how to keep slaves, your holy book is disqualified as a source for developing a moral code. You read that and you go, yeah, I mean, I could discuss that some, okay? So, let's begin by saying anybody who says, I've got the answer and I'm totally at peace with this, is not thinking straight, okay? I mean, as we read these, even if we have answers for them, and many of them we do, we still got to go, I mean, it's hard for me not to judge ancients by my worldview right now, okay? And I'm just not, I can give you answers, and at the end of the answer, I'm still saying, I'm still kind of uncomfortable with this. And there are statements in the law that I go, I don't have an answer for that one, so why don't we just skip it and go on to something else, okay? So let's begin with this. The word slave that's a loaded term, isn't it? I mean, you can't use that term in an innocuous manner. To be honest with you, the Hebrew word that's used there, Greek word as well, is more accurately translated, although not always, more accurately translated servant than slave. And you say, well, I think you're just splitting hairs here, you know. But I am choosing to split hairs because the word slave is such a loaded term these days. When we hear slave, we're thinking of American Civil War time, okay? And there's no way for us to really see slavery in any other way. No way to even talk about it. Even when I use the word slavery, your mind doesn't go anywhere else, right? It goes right there. So let me give you a couple of verses here. Genesis chapter 9, verse 26 and 27. If you have an NIV, you can look at that one there. Genesis 9. He also said, praise be the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Japheth. So this backs up to when Canaan saw Noah naked and his other two brothers covered him up, and Canaan got punished for that. And the language used there is a language of slavery, okay, of enslavement, that the other two brothers would rule over this brother here. Now, let me read it to you out of the ESV. He also said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. And you just changed one word there, right? And all of a sudden, it sits differently with us, doesn't it? The majority of the times that the word is used in the Hebrew Bible is referring to a servant role. And that really means when one person is subservient to another one. Whether it could be used as an employee. Oftentimes, the king's nobles who served under him were called his servants, okay? They weren't slaves, but they served in that role, okay? So you might even, oftentimes when we preach about Paul's teaching about servants and masters, we apply it to bosses and employees, which is not totally appropriate, but the best thing we can do. But sometimes that relationship is the same thing. I am subservient. They have the authority. I'm the one who works underneath them. So there were two main kinds of slavery in the ancient world. Now, this is oversimplifying, but There's the slavery by conquest. So you conquer people, you enslave them. So in Joshua 17 is written this. Yet the Manassites were not able to occupy these towns, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that region. However, when Israel grew stronger, they subjected the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not drive them completely out. Okay, so, and you can see that. I mean, this just opens up a whole can of worms about other issues when God would tell the Jews to go in and wipe out everybody, and sometimes he'd even use language like men and women and children. You go, boy, I am not at peace with that. But I don't trust God because of those verses. I trust God because of other verses, and that allows me to tolerate these even though I don't like them, okay? So there's a slavery by conquest. And then there's this other kind of slavery, which is really the broader kind of slavery. Steve, now let's go where you were going to go there. How do you describe that kind of slavery?
Verse 21, which, by the way, the NIV reverses the words. The ESV says slave, which is what I read from, and the NIV says servant.
Oh, yeah?
Indentured servitude was our country was populated in the very earliest of times. People who were too poor to pay for passage would sell themselves as an indentured servant, and for 7 years they worked for somebody to pay off their passage into the United States. We hear about it in our history classes, but it wasn't a big deal. So I see that same thing, that same process of 7 years. In the 7th year, he is not purchased as a permanent purchase the way that slaves were in the United States in the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s. Those were permanent purchases. The slave never had a chance to be freed except at the pure will of his owner.
Okay.
And so God has set limits on having this indentured servitude as far as time. It's not a permanent thing. If you get back to the economics, I'll make this quick. If you get back to the economics of the situation that Donna pointed out, if you had a wealthy landowner who purchased indentured servants and never released them, or I'm sorry, he mistreated them during their indentured servitude, then the word would get out. This guy's not, he's going to do bad things with your child or yourself if you sell yourself to them.
Yeah.
So he would look to treat them well because it economically benefited him to purchase these servants.
So let's kind of camp on that phrase, indentured servant, because that one we can kind of get our heads around. So Steve mentioned if somebody wanted to come to the New World, they had no money, they could book passage, they would sell themselves into slavery, indentured servitude, with somebody here in the New World. They would come and they would have to work for them for so long. They would oftentimes provide them housing and food and shelter, and they would work. And even as Scripture talks about it, you could be an indentured servant, and if, as we're going to look at later, you're free after 7 years if you're a Hebrew slave to a Hebrew master. But if during your indentured time you were able to start a business and make more income and work 2 jobs and get more money, you could pay off your debt earlier. So you could be free. The speed of your freedom was only limited by your ability to raise money and to pay off that debt. So I'm still not totally comfortable there, but that's a lot more understandable. Also, as Donna mentioned, with poverty, the ancient world was rife with poverty. And so people would sell themselves into slavery, indentured servitude, because their families were starving and they could now provide for their families for so many years. The nearest thing we have to that is probably filing for bankruptcy. I mean, bankruptcy is a godsend for people who are underwater and can't get out. But there's a price to be paid for that, right? For most people, unless you're a Fortune 500 company. But for most people, there's a price to be paid for that. Your credit rating is shot, and you can't get loans, and blah blah. So there's a price to be paid for that. So you have to live in a much reduced fashion until you can get things together and start to rebuild yourself. So that may be something similar to what we're talking about here. Now, early American U.S. slavery is totally different. Because see, in Hebrews, for the Jews, a Jew would sell himself into slavery to another Jew. In fact, sometimes in the laws, they talk about the slave being your brother. But in early American slavery, there was this sense that the people who are being brought over against their will into slavery, not choice, against their will into slavery, are less than human. Or they are so uncivilized that we cannot treat them as human. And anytime, and just not with slavery, from World War II or whatever else, anytime you begin to see other people as something other than human, what always follows after that is mistreatment. You begin to treat them in a way that treats them as chattel, as a property, and not as someone worthy of care or attention or respect. It's David.
Just checking my own memory or knowledge, the chattel slavery of the early colonization of the U.S. didn't start here. I mean, it started in previous slave trades before the U.S. was even established and territories were founded. I mean, we didn't create that type of slavery.
No. I mean, I haven't done the broad study, but my stab at the wisdom of ignorance is that slavery on that level, especially with African slaves, was a British invention. But it was a British invention that had the U.S. as a prime component in it. And so we ended up with the yoke of slavery. England forbid slavery before we did, but we ended up having to pay the price, still paying the price for slavery. So we were not the instigators, but we were not innocent bystanders either. Okay. In the broader ancient world, and I don't read a whole lot of ancient law code because I don't want to. But there are people out there, we'll call them nerds, who do read this stuff. And they speak unanimously about this. Ancient law code of other cultures are cruel in their description of how they treat other people, especially those who are seen to be of a lower caste in their society or outsiders who are living under our protective umbrella. Cruel mistreatment. And we don't know a whole lot about that because it's not a common topic. But I think that is a crucial thing for us to understand as we look at biblical teachings about slavery. We have to understand where they were coming from to understand what the intent of these verses and passages were. So let's look at a few verses here. We have more verses than we have time to go through, but let's begin by looking at a few that says this. And we've made this point before, but just want to make it again. The Bible is unanimous in its teachings that God wants his people to protect the poor, the weak, and the powerless. Old New Testament alike, no exception. It comes out, okay? So it says this in Deuteronomy 15. If anyone is poor among you, your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God has given you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. So that's the teaching of God, okay, about this. In fact, he says, if you lend money, don't charge interest to your fellow Hebrews. He says, if they put their coat up for collateral, give it back to them at night because they need something to stay warm. We say, don't harvest the edges of your field. Remember that one? Leave that. Now, see, it's real easy for us to read the passages, and they're not a lot of them, but there's enough of them to make the case that the Bible speaks about slavery. But then we sometimes forget about all these other verses that talk about this other side, okay? That there's this constant desire to treat other people, especially the poor and the weak and the powerless, with care and respect and honor. Leviticus 19:13 says this: do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. That's how some people increase their profit margin, right? I expect payment within 30 days, and I will write you a check within 90 days, right? And that's how. I mean, they get a 60-day float, and they make a little interest off that, and they can survive with that. Not as much these days, but they can survive with that. Okay. Families should take care of their own family members who are destitute and poor. Leviticus 25:25 says this: if one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. All right? So I hit the skids, can't pay my bills. I sell my car to cover the bills. In our day and age, kind of like, well, I hope you learned your lesson. But selling your car to pay your bills also comes with a price, right? How are you going to get a job? How are you going to get to a job? Okay? Family should come and redeem that back at your own cost because they're your family. Deuteronomy 25, we won't read this passage, but if you are a widow and you don't have children, your husband's family, brothers, should marry you. We won't get into polygamy here. Should marry you, have children with you. The spoken reason is this: so your brother's lineage can go on. But also comes with that this widow can be taken care of in her old age by children that she's going to have, not from her husband because he passed away, but from the family line there. There's that sense of we're not going to leave our family's widows out in the cold. We're going to provide for them one way or the other. There are even laws about how to treat non-Israelites. Sometimes we tend to think the Jews were all about this: treat your fellow Jews well, but everybody else you could just, treat them however you want to. But let's look at a few of those. Exodus 23, verse 9, here's a verse. You shall not oppress a resident alien. You know the heart of an alien, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. So don't mistreat. If somebody's in your country and they're not one of you, you treat them kindly. You shall not withhold wages from the poor or the needy laborers, whether or not they're Israelite or whether or not they're alien, who reside in your lands of your town. Don't withhold their wages from them. Leviticus 19:34, the alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself. Tell you what, the immigration question is a thorny question. But let's at least open our view wide enough to say that making a de facto statement, if you're here, you're going back. if you're there, you're not getting in, blanket statement. I think the teaching of Scripture says there's some nuance here, and there's some responsibility on both sides of this thing. And I'm not gonna map that out for us. I don't know that there is a mapped out answer, but there's at least it's not so simplistic as, let's just build a wall and keep everybody out. I think there's some nuance there. Judges says you're to treat foreigners same way you treat your citizens here. In fact, he says this in Leviticus 24:22. You shall have one law for the alien and for the citizen. Not a separate law for the citizen and a separate one for the alien. Same law applies. Treat everybody the same way. Doesn't matter where they came from, who they are. Everybody is held accountable to the laws. So, how do you treat your servants, your indentured servants? Deuteronomy 5:13 is a passage you know well. It's also spoken of in Exodus chapter 20. 6 days you shall labor and do not work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You know that, don't you? On the Sabbath to keep it holy. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your sons, nor your daughters, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, and he goes on and on. I mean, here we have a law that says Jewish people get a day of rest. And guess what? Everybody else gets one too. Doesn't matter whether you're Jewish or not, you get a day of rest. I'll have you look this one up. This is an interesting one. Deuteronomy 23, verse 15 and 16. Deuteronomy 23, verse 15 and 16. If a slave has taken refuge with you, do not hand them over to their master. Let them live among you wherever they like and in whatever town they choose. Do not oppress them. It's hard to know exactly what we're talking about here. I think there's a likelihood that we're talking about somebody who is not a Jewish person and coming into Israel, and you're not to send them back. But it might even apply to indentured servants who are from, the Jewish guy down the street. And the assumption is, and I don't think it's reading too much into it, is that people would escape that because they're being mistreated there. And if you're being mistreated there and you're escaping and they come to you, you just don't send them back, Dred Scott. You say, no, okay, you're going to be protected here. We're going to take care of you here. Whether that's a foreign slaveholder or even if it's the guy down the street, no, they're safe here.
How does that jive with the way the laws, though? Because I would imagine that there would be a law that you would return a runaway slave.
There isn't. But now understand here, David said he would assume there'd be a law that you would return a runaway slave. And let's revisit, let's not see this through Civil War slavery terms, okay? Let's see this through indentured servitude terms. That I'm not going to run, if you're treating me nicely and you've paid my bills and I'm working off that debt and I've got 7 years and I'm free, whether or not the debt's totally paid off or not, okay? And if it's the Jubilee year, everybody's free. In fact, the law in the words of the law is this: if you're loaning people money, don't be stingy around year 48, because at year 50, you're going to have to forgive all the debts. You just keep on loaning money. God's going to take care of you at year 48 and at year 3, when you got another 47 years to go, okay? So if I'm an indentured servant and you are treating me well and I'm giving you good service, I'm not gonna run from this, okay? Because I am paying off my debt and I'm working toward freedom. The only reason that I would run from you And again, I may be reading too much into this, but I don't think that I am. The only reason I would run from you is if you were mistreating me, if you were not providing for me, if you were not taking care of you, if you were working me beyond what is reasonable, if this was a toxic relationship, then I would run from them. So as far as I'm aware, David, I may be wrong, there is no teaching here about what to do with slaves that leave their servitude, except this one here that says you shouldn't return them. Yes, sir?
That also goes into the economic situation that if you have indentured servants and they leave, and there's no way to, force their return, you've lost out because you paid a debt, or, paid
Right.
them to be an indentured servant. You just lost out on getting labor to pay that back. And so therefore that would encourage masters to treat their indentured servants well.
Yeah, as far as indentured servitude is away from our modern cultural way of thinking things, seeing someone as an indentured servant is light years ahead of seeing someone as chattel slavery. Okay, your motivation is totally different. The way you respond to the relationship is totally different. So it is a different type of.
There were even studies that have shown that slaves in the Deep South were treated far worse than slaves in the border states.
Mm-hmm.
Because slaves could escape and realistically get, to freedom and never be seen again, so you would treat them nicer. Whereas in the Deep South, they got a long way to go and probably going to get caught.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm going to get them back and
Do whatever I want to do.
treat them however I want to.
Let me also make one passage here about this indentured servant versus Civil War slavery, because one is I signed up for this, and the other one is I was forced into this. There is a law, Exodus 21:16 that says this: anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Doesn't use the word slavery here, but it has all the trappings of slavery. You would kidnap somebody in order to force him to be your servant.
That's what they did with the American slave trade.
Okay, so I do have the problem with this in here. An owner who hits a male or female slave in the eye and destroys it must let the slave go free to compensate for the eye. And an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male or female slave must let the slave go to compensate for the tooth. And you can read that and you go, man, there's a lot of mistreatment of slaves going on here. And I'm sure there was some mistreatment of slaves going on here. How else can we read this verse? Okay, all right. Well, I maybe.
Typically, losing a tooth or an eye means that the master reached out and struck them
Yeah.
in a moment of
Anger. Yeah.
that can happen in relationships where you feel like raising your hand against somebody.
So let me make this point here. Note, because it's really easy to read that and you go, man, the Bible is for beating up your slaves. Let's make this point here. The passage does not give any approval for the mistreatment of slaves. In fact, what the passage does say is this: if you mistreat your slave, you will pay a price for that. To be honest with you, the passage, we would have been happy if he says, hey, you shouldn't own slaves, but if you do and you do this, okay. But really, the passage is meant to say, slave owners, do not mistreat your slaves. If you do, it's going to cost you, okay? So in actuality, although the passage comes across sometimes to light readers as approval, the passage is really saying this is not what this relationship is about. And if you make it like that, you're going to have to pay a big price for it. The other one that's troubling is this idea of women sold into slavery being treated differently. You go, man, I mean, that rings wrong for us on a whole lot of levels, not just human slavery, but male and female differences and stuff. And this one is convoluted as well, because in the ancient world, arranged marriages were the norm. And as Donna mentioned, sometimes that was how you sustained your family or how you elevated your family.
Women didn't have a lot of choices.
And they didn't.
Go down and work at the local Kmart.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of,
Programs to provide support for you as a single mom.
right. Believe me, I'm uncomfortable as I say this, but there is truth in it somewhere, that arranged marriages was sometimes a way to improve the status of the family or the woman. Okay. Now this one here is described. We have both languages, this servitude language and this marriage language. So probably this person was sold as a servant wife, okay? As someone who would be a wife, but also be a servant in the household. But we don't read the whole passage sometimes. Let me read this to you. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed by the family. She can go back. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. Can't sell her again. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, keeps her as his wife, but marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, food, clothing, marital rights, she is to go free without any payment of money. I got to tell you, I'm still uncomfortable with it, but I'm less uncomfortable with it, okay? Because I'm able to see it a little bit through that ancient lens, and even in my discomfort, there are protections in this passage. Do you see that? It is not our modern understanding, but there are still protections here. Steve brought up, and we're going to close with this, that there is this forbiddance of lifelong servitude, that they are to work for a season, 7 years or the 50th year, and they are to be set free at that point. There is this interesting passage about if you did not want to be set free. Maybe you loved working for your master. Now that's an interesting concept, isn't it? Maybe you had this view of the caste system. This is good I'm going to get. Or maybe it's because your master gave you a wife. She can't go with you. So now I'm going to stay because we're going to be a family here. Then you can pledge lifelong service to this person. Not as a slave, but as an indentured servant, as a servant, okay? To be treated with respect and kindness and care, but still working for the master, and the master will then identify you by piercing your ear, and that would be a signal that you are now a lifelong servant of this master. Again, it's hard for us to even conceptualize those kind of relationships. Well, maybe marriage, okay? It's hard for us to conceptualize those kind of relationships. But what's interesting, that the people that were living them, this servant who was living it, there were enough of them who said, I want to stay, that they made a law about it, okay? So we can look back from centuries later and go, those people are being mistreated. They didn't see the world right. They're not doing right. And I got to tell you, all I can say is this. The people who were living it said, that's what I choose. That's what I want. Okay, we're late. We'll close with this. Time and again throughout the Old Testament, this phrase is repeated 5 to 8 times. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. And that's why I give you this command today. Usually always tied in with commands about slavery, about how to treat your slaves, about how not to mistreat them. He'll say something like this. Remember, you were slaves one time too. Now, we don't have a phrase like that in our modern culture, but we do have a phrase like it, and here it is. But for the grace of God, go I. And you've said that before. You've heard it before. It's like, I look at Peter over here and go, man, he should be doing much better. He's not doing. He's not. I can't believe it. And Peter's agreeing over me over there. When I was his age, I was whatever else. And we can have that back and forth battle over this, and yet I go, I better treat Peter with some kindness here, because one of these days Peter's going to be making twice the money that I'm going to be making, and I'm going to have a moment where my life falls apart, and I've got to need some compassion coming to me. I'm choosing Peter because he's not a renegade, okay? But I'm gonna need his kindness. So I'm gonna treat with kindness, even when it's people that aren't doing as I think they should, or measuring up where they should, or taking ownership like they should. I'm gonna treat them with kindness because, either I have been in the past or I will be in the future. So I better, but for the grace of God, go I. All right, I hope you leave tonight still troubled with slavery passages, okay?
You didn't talk about the ones in the New Testament, how God calls us his slaves.
True, and Paul would say, I'm a servant, same word, I'm a servant of Christ, I mean, those are self-chosen titles as well, I choose to be a slave of Christ. Yes, good master. Yes, and that's a good point, Jeff, that master-servant relationship, that exists there should be the one that we should model in, or the ancients should have modeled, and even the Civil War slave people should have modeled, not forced to slavery, All right. Go home and be troubled. Okay.